infrastructure systems really deliver essential services across all sectors, allowing our economies and societies to function. We also know that infrastructure investment can be a key lever for boosting economic growth and create decent jobs and combating inequalities. And this importance of infrastructure is very well reflected in the fact that infrastructure influences more than 90% of all SDG targets and across all the 17 goals. We also know at the same time that infrastructure can create major negative impact for the environment. The construction and operation of infrastructure is responsible for 79% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it has also direct and indirect impacts on biodiversity and pollution. So that means that the way we plan and deliver infrastructures, the type of infrastructure we choose, are really fundamental in relation to the triple planetary crisis. And the decision that we take in this sector can really have lasting impacts for several decades in some cases. So UN member states recognize these challenges at the 5th UN Environment Assembly last year in 2022. And there they adopted a resolution on sustainable and resilient infrastructure. This resolution stresses the need to integrate sustainability and resilience into infrastructure planning and investment decisions for country, to apply good practices and make use of the existing knowledge, tools, and guidance that can help to do this. We also know that many countries need support to be able to do this. And this resolution recognizes this as well and highlights the need for knowledge sharing, for training, for capacity building, particularly related to the use of existing tools, approaches, knowledge, and other resources. So this is one of the purpose of this event, to contribute to that capacity building, because capacity building is something that most of the organization represented here today are involved with in one way or the other, but we tend to follow the same delivery models that we are used to. So in today's event, we'll have the chance to discuss a new model, which is called the Infrastructure Sustainability Learning model, and which is adapted from a model that is used in the medical community. The model is scalable, effective, and low-cost capacity building approach for sustainable infrastructure specialists and practitioner. So this is a topic that is of great importance to my government as well, and Switzerland has been supporting UNEP in the implementation of this UNEA resolution. We actively supported the resolution at UNEA, and we are very happy that you are all here today to come and to discuss this. I regret that I'm not able to join this event in person, but I really wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Laura, for the excellent introduction. I should also say as well, we're very grateful for the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment's support for the resolution during the UNEA negotiations and also their ongoing support for our work. So thank you very much. And quickly, before I start, I'd also like to thank Diana and the rest of the team at the Geneva Environment Network for organizing the event and all their great support, not just for the event, but for the environmental community in Geneva in general. So thank you very much. So as Laura talked about today, we're going to talk about a capacity building initiative that UNEP has been working on with some partners, and two of them are here with us today, Dr. Elizabeth Lossus and Sarah Mason from Duke University in the US. And we've been working together on this initiative for, I guess, almost a couple of years at this point. There's a couple of other key partners who couldn't be with us today, and that is Conservation International and ICSI, which is the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure. Yeah, so we're going to tell you about this capacity building initiative. Before starting, I wanted to very quickly just go over what we mean by sustainable infrastructure. It may be somewhat of a new topic to some of those in the audience. But first of all, when we're talking about infrastructure, we're really taking a broad view of infrastructure. So we're talking about traditional infrastructure sectors like transport and energy and water, but we also include in this telecommunications, food systems, healthcare, all these different types of infrastructure that we rely on for different services. And also, really importantly, it includes nature and natural infrastructure that also can deliver a lot of these services either on its own or in conjunction with built infrastructure assets. And here you see on the slide our working definition of sustainable infrastructure, which is those infrastructure systems that are planned, designed, procured, constructed, operated, maintained, and decommissioned in a manner that ensures economic and financial, social, environmental, and institutional sustainability over the life cycle. So maybe a couple of key things to point out. There is really that it's covering all the dimensions of sustainability. So not just environmental sustainability, but the economic and social dimensions as well are equally important. And then, as you can see from the definition, it's really, there's not any particular types or sectors of infrastructure that are necessarily sustainable or not. It's really about the outcomes from infrastructure development. And in reality, everything's going to sit somewhere on a continuum of sustainability. And so really our work is about trying to push things towards the more sustainable end. So moving on to the Infrastructure Sustainability Learning Network that we're here to talk about today. So the work really came from, as Laura talked about, the fact that we know we need a huge amount of infrastructure in the world to be able to achieve our development objectives, SDGs or other objectives as well. So we know that there's going to be a huge amount of investment into infrastructure coming, that there's various estimates out there, but I think, safe to say we're looking at trillions of dollars annually needed in infrastructure development to meet our global development needs over the coming decades. This is potentially the largest infrastructure investment boom in history. Much of it is going to be coming in the developing world. And because of the long lifespans of most infrastructure projects, usually an infrastructure asset is designed to last for decades. So the outcomes of this investment is really going to lock in the effects for the long term, either positive or negative. So it's really critical to get these infrastructure investments right in terms of making sure they're as sustainable and resilient as possible. And there is quite a large base of resources and tools and knowledge available out there for integrating sustainability and resilience into infrastructure. So it's not necessarily that there's a lack of this knowledge or tools, but what we do know through our work, including through the member state negotiations on those two UN Environment Assembly resolutions, and through our own consultations with member states, is there is a gap between the resources that are available and then the people that actually need those resources, knowing what's available, knowing where to find it, knowing how to use it. And we all collectively have done a lot of work on capacity building, and we tend to have done it through workshops or direct training. There's lots of different models, but we started thinking about how we might, what are the gaps out there in capacity building for infrastructure? How can we get the resources to the people who need them more effectively? And we were sort of thinking about maybe are there different ways that we could go about our capacity building work that could complement the existing stuff that's out there. And so in the process of these discussions, we came across, thank you. We came across a really interesting initiative called Project Echo, which is from the healthcare sector that's been hugely successful in the healthcare world, and started thinking about maybe this might be a model we could use for infrastructure training and capacity building. So Project Echo in the healthcare world is based around the development of echo learning hubs, as they call them, which are virtual communities of practice that bring together practitioners and experts to share knowledge and problem solve. And it's kind of based on this idea, which, as I understand, is quite common in hospital settings, where colleagues in a certain department or working on a topic will get together sort of regularly, once a week or something, and talk about cases that they've seen over the week, and sort of go through, what had happened, what the case was, how they dealt with it, get feedback from colleagues on, how they might have dealt with it, or just sort of a group learning and kind of a group problem solving exercise. And so Project Echo sought to kind of recreate that thing in a kind of a more systematic way and make it more widely available to healthcare practitioners who may not have access to other expertise in the workplace, particularly people that maybe are based in rural settings in developing countries and don't have access to other colleagues, basically. And so you can see here the sort of traditional telemedicine model, where you have a specialist managing a patient remotely. And we were thinking about the example of something like Doctors Without Borders, where you have a healthcare issue in a location, you send a bunch of specialists there, they go treat a bunch of people for a set amount of time, whether it's a week or a few weeks or something, and then they leave. Whereas the Echo model sought to create this community of practice of sort of these local community-based primary care teams who meet regularly to discuss cases and problems that they've encountered, and share knowledge and sort of insights amongst themselves, but also having access to sort of external experts, specialists in different types of medicine that can also provide input, connect them with the resources, that kind of thing. And basically it becomes a more efficient way to reach a larger number of patients and treat more people. So this started, as you can see on the slide, back in the mid-2000s. It was based on something that was a little bit more innovative at the time than it is now, which is this use of the virtual conferencing technology to meet virtually. And as you can see on the thing here, was growing quite steadily and was fairly successful. But when COVID hit, it was really ideally placed to respond, help practitioners respond to the COVID crisis. And so you can see here in the graph that the number of attendances at the meetings really exploded during COVID. And there are now more than 500 Echo hubs dealing with each hub could be, have a different theme. It's not all COVID related, but there's over 500 hubs, which are each their own community of practice around the world on every continent, and then supported by a sort of a global network that provides that support architecture. And so based on this, we started to think about maybe this is something we could look at and apply to our challenge, where we're trying to get provide more training capacity building to infrastructure practitioners. And I will now let Liz take it from here and continue the story.
Thanks, Rowan. And just before we leave this slide, that number is 4 million now, 4 million different healthcare practitioners that this has reached. So it's truly a very impactful model that is low cost and high reach or scalability. So as Rowan explained, the medical community has come up with this way of trying to help doctors and other health practitioners that may not be trained in specialty care have a nice way of accessing their peers to problem solve, but also input from experts and resources. We thought this model might be similar for the infrastructure world, where in this case, you see our example of traditionally, you have a project that's going to be built, and perhaps in a developing country where there isn't a lot of expertise for sustainable infrastructure, so maybe a consultant gets sent in, like Doctors Without Borders, gets sent in, helps design the project, gets it off the ground, goes home, and really nothing is left as far as building capacity within that country. Or maybe even you have a workshop and you train 3 or 4 or a dozen people, but still the extent is quite low. And by people, I mean within the infrastructure community, we're talking about local government planners, engineers, contractors and construction firms, architects, urban planners, the NGO community that supports or helps overseas. So these are all the practitioners that are on the ground who, many of whom have an interest or desire to build sustainable infrastructure, but may not have the training, the capacity, or access to the resources. So we have developed this idea of a virtual learning hub or ISLE hub, in which not sure if I can use cannot use the pointer, but in the middle you see, say, 4 groups of different colors, and these are the learners or the practitioners. Maybe these are local government officials in a series of communities that are not all together, but are all dealing with similar projects, perhaps in this case, building renewable energy projects. And what these, or it could be perhaps there's one big road project, highway project, and the different groups are different sectors that are involved. So maybe one are the planners and another are the engineers and the others are dealing with procurement, and they all have pieces of the puzzle and it's the same project, but they're in different locations and having different pieces. So you can, what the hub includes is really what the local community needs, what these individuals are looking for. It is a very flexible model. And what they do is they share their successes, their challenges, their problems with each other. Say with each session, one might bring forward an issue and how they are trying to solve it and what barriers they are having. And other individuals in the group will say, well, when we were dealing with this a couple months ago, this is how we dealt with it, et cetera. Just like Rowan expressed with the doctors in the hospitals. And then, in addition, this is mostly virtual, although it can be complemented with in-person meetings. You also have input from expertise. It might be within the same country, it might be international, whose lives are spent mostly addressing issues like this, and they do not, they're not providing webinars where they're pushing information out. Rather, they provide information as needed. Maybe they'll do a little technical presentation, but a lot of what they're doing is interacting and helping provide access to information, resources, and other colleagues that might be able to help address this. This is all in a virtual setting. And then each of these individuals or groups will go back to their own individual projects and apply the issues and then sort of come back and repeat the next session, which might be in 2 weeks or might be in a month, sort of regular sessions. And these hubs may last a determinate amount of time. It might be 1 year, where perhaps there's a big project and you go through all the phases of planning and implementation over the course of the year, dealing with issues that come up at different points along the setting, or it might be a more open-ended community of practice where you continue to come together and address issues as they arise. So in order to test this model, in 2020 and 2021, we decided to try a global learning hub called Sustainable Infrastructure, putting principles into practice, where we invited anyone interested broadly in sustainable infrastructure. And over 13 months, we held a whole series of these monthly webinars where we developed a little curriculum that followed some guidelines that UNEP had just put out on good practices for sustainable infrastructure. And these started at strategic planning and really went down through all the steps one might do. And so for each one of our hour-and-a-quarter sessions, we would have a little introduction to what the principle was, and then we brought in an expert who had developed some tool or resource who presented the tool. There was an interactive polling component and question and answer, but the main part of the session was the presentation by some practitioner of some infrastructure project that had dealt with that issue. And after the presentation, we broke into breakout groups so that there could be smaller discussions of the case and the issues around it. We held this for a year and these are the 10 best practice principles. We're happy to share the link with anyone interested in looking at them more closely. We did a lot of monitoring along the way, surveying to get feedback and try and identify performance, and had 642 people participate over the course of the year. Some came for many sessions, others just came for one, from about 70 plus different countries. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but the group that was best represented were the engineers. And second were people from local governments, and then also academia, nonprofits, civil society, et cetera. But in general, there was a strong support for it, particularly the people who kept coming back. There are also, all of these sessions are online, and so we've had thousands of people download the webinars since then. At the completion of this, we began to hold a few focus groups to find out, is this a model that works? Should we move forward? And if so, how should we adapt that? And so that's where we are now. We are looking at stage 2. And the next stage, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Sarah Mason, in a moment to talk about. We are now trying to roll out a series of small learning hubs that are responding to a need from various communities that find this a useful way to be able to quickly and broadly develop a community and share information that fits their local need. And then we're trying to do a sort of apparatus over this, an architecture to help support and facilitate a whole network of these learning hubs. So Sarah is going to describe some of the individual learning hubs that are now underdeveloped under more specific topics.
Yeah, so hopefully this can make all of this a little bit more tangible. So these are some of the topics that we've been thinking about. So the first hub that's under development and that we have some partners who are interested in spinning this out is focused on sustainable rebuilding in Turkey after the recent earthquake. So we've connected with a group from a technical university in Turkey that's really interested in in supporting a network of local planners that want to rebuild sustainably. And so the idea would be to kind of host an initial meeting, bringing all of these local community planners together, and then over the course of a year or so, have these sort of virtual hub meetings where they talk about the kind of issues that they're facing, what's working, what's not working, to allow them to kind of exchange knowledge and really try to bring sustainability into the process of rebuilding. The idea would be, it's really being hosted through these experts in Turkey, but that we can also partner with them to try to bring in external experts that we have sort of interacted with over the course of our work, who might also be able to provide some insight or tools or resources that could help with this process. The second hub that we're thinking about, or that is actually already kind of in process, is focused on green-gray infrastructure. So these are more regionally focused. And so there's a group of practitioners in the Asia Pacific region, as well as a group of practitioners in the Americas that are really made up of mostly engineers, but also NGOs and other practitioners who are implementing green-gray infrastructure on the ground. And the idea of these hubs is to really just give them an opportunity and a place to exchange knowledge and resources and tools that can help get these projects in place. The next hub that we're trying to spin out now is really focused on two different ongoing projects. The first is an EU project called Bison that just finished. So that was a 4-year project that really focused on integrating or mainstreaming biodiversity into the planning and implementation of transportation infrastructure, or it was sort of research on best practices associated with that. And so now there's a need to make sure that all the research that was done gets into the hands of people who can use it and can implement it. This is sort of in parallel to another effort through WWF and the GEF that is trying to do something very similar, but in Southeast Asia. And so the idea would be to start up sort of regionally focused hubs, one in Europe and one in Southeast Asia, to share best practices on mainstreaming biodiversity in the development of transportation infrastructure, but then to also allow these hubs to interact so that people from these two different regions can share, again, what's working, what's not working, and tools and resources that were useful, as well as research that was useful to inform this work. And then finally, this one is a little bit different, but as Rowan talked about, there's this sort of flood of infrastructure that is about to be built across the world. And there's really a need to train the next generation of engineers to incorporate sustainability throughout the life cycle of infrastructure development, implementation, planning. And there are not that many universities around the world that have specifically sustainable infrastructure programs. And so after we did our pilot project that Liz just talked about, she mentioned that engineers were made up the largest portion of our attendance. And when we did those sort of feedback surveys and interviews at the end of this pilot, what we heard from these engineers was that there was really a need to start developing these sustainable infrastructure engineering curricula. And so the idea of this hub would be to connect sort of education leaders in the engineering space. So this could be deans or other people who work at engineering schools who are thinking about developing these curricula or who have already done so that they can kind of exchange information about how these programs can be built out most effectively. We're starting with a geographic focus on the Americas for this hub, but we're also thinking about whether that could be transported elsewhere as well. So those are some sort of specific ideas of hubs we have in progress. So that's kind of that first lower level of things that we're trying to get moving. And I'm going to hand it back to Liz to talk about kind of the broader vision for what this all could look like.
And just to follow up on the engineering hubs, we're connected to a network of deans in Africa. engineering deans and hoping that that would be a next step for after the Americas, but somewhat funding dependent. So what we've described so far are the individual learning hubs, which create these small communities of practice that share issues, et cetera. What the ISLE hubs and super hub has to do, this is the full network, and this is really what leverages this whole model to something really much bigger and much more impactful, where you can connect all these hubs together and provide support to them and connect them so that it's not just dealing with one issue at a time in one small group, but you really get a powerful next step. And that is the vision that we are now growing. And it isn't going to just suddenly be, it isn't suddenly going to be wrapped on top of it. This is a growing process, but what I'm describing is the vision of how this is going to go forward. So the first is developing a global network of these individual learning hubs. And as I said, these will be mostly self-driven. If there's a local need and a group and an individual or group of individuals that really push it, we're there to support it and put it in place. We're not going to impose these on anyone, but the idea is that we will start it. But, and these were the advantages that we've already described. It's case-based, demand-driven, virtual conductivity, et cetera. The next level is the center of excellence, or the super hub, that connects all these and really builds the strength of this network. And what this does, the most basic thing that this larger super hub will do is help with the administration and facilitation. For example, as with the Project ECHO model in the health community, when you start a learning hub, the person running it doesn't necessarily know how to run one of these networks and facilitate the case presentations, et cetera. So we will provide, the idea is to provide training, a course set where individuals who are interested can essentially be trained to be able to lead a hub. And then in addition, we would develop, again, drawing on Project ECHO, a whole series of tools and templates to help with the hub. So for example, we've already developed with our pilot series a PowerPoint template for a case that helps whoever's going to present know what is the information that needs to be presented and produce consistency so that you really get at what the issues are and you don't spend the whole time describing, the background. And there's a whole series of tools and even the possibility of providing accreditation or continuing learning for the presenters. A lot of the actual curriculum development templates, tools for actually running are much more efficiently developed at one level rather than redesigned every time you wanted to do a hub. The second is, the second point is the actual training once you have the tools. But the third point here, connection to global experts, is really a critical piece. What we're trying to do is become a clearinghouse. There are a lot of experts out there that would like to share their research, their expertise, the tools they've developed more broadly, but don't necessarily have access to people on the ground. So we would really want to be the sort of clearinghouse to connect experts to the hubs that need them. And it might be a hub that has, a whole curriculum planned in each one of their sessions would connect them with a different expert, or maybe another hub might have an expert that sticks with them the entire time. It's very flexible. We also, it says create resources that are helpful to the hub. I think we probably should have, but not create, but access resources helpful to the hub, because we as a group are not creating new tools. What we're trying to do and we're going to hear about this in a minute when we move over to GIZ, what we want to do is help connect the resources and the tools to those that need them. So whether it's a financial tool like Savi, or a vulnerability assessment tool, there's a whole wide range. And what we want to do is help, again, create a clearinghouse to the tools. We also are looking for an advisory group that will help bring together expertise of the broader community, and finally, a library of resources. What you're going to have from these is case studies, and we hope to develop a case study library where you don't have to be active in a hub. You could just go and actually download a case study, whether it's a video or a write-up, or any number of sort of e-learning tools that would hopefully eventually all be developed under this network. I'm not sure why it's not moving.
It's not go on. It should be the GIZ slides.
So as we're figuring this out, what I want to sort of sum up this part by saying this idea of the super hub, or the center of excellence, is trying to create a sort of a connection between the vast number of different organizations and individuals and resources working on this, and the people that need the information. And what we're not trying to do is move into anybody else's space, but just create those connections. So what we wanted to now do is shift over to our colleague at GIZ to talk about some activities they are doing, and just provide an example of how these two can connect together as an example of what might be possible bringing together the broader community.
Thanks very much, Liz. Yeah, so I'd like to introduce our colleague Mira Piel, who's joining online. Mira, are you there?
Yes, Rowan, I'm here.
Okay, great. We can hear you. So yeah, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Rowan. And also welcome from me into the round, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, even if it's just virtually. My name is Mira Piel. I'm an advisor at GIZ, and I work for a project called the Infrastructure Solutions Incubator, which is working on integrating sustainability along the infrastructure lifecycle. So yeah, I'm very happy to explain a little bit more what our project is doing to you today, and also make the connection to the IL network and how we think this could feed into the work that we're doing. Can we go to the next slide, please? So you've already heard some of the figures presented here in the beginning. So all I would like to add is really what this shows is that we cannot tackle the climate crisis without fundamentally changing and adapting our infrastructure systems. But the connection to sustainability goes way beyond the role of infrastructure and climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, but includes other sustainability issues like biodiversity, gender equality, health, or economic development. So therefore, infrastructure development is an important vehicle to reach the SDGs and the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Agreement. As it shows, sustainability in infrastructure development also covers several dimensions, and we actually work with the same conceptualization that Rowan presented earlier, so covering economic and financial, social and environmental sustainability, climate resilience, and institutional sustainability. Sustainability, therefore, is a multidimensional concept and addresses various issues in infrastructure development, and a whole of sustainability approach is needed to make infrastructure systems fit for the future and ensure that infrastructure development benefits society as a whole. This topic of sustainable infrastructure development has also gained new momentum on a more political level, So global infrastructure initiatives such as the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment or the EU Global Gateway aim to mobilize more private capital for more infrastructure projects. And what this requires is actually empowering public officials in partner institutions to mainstream good quality principles and standards that adhere to this whole of sustainability approach. Only then we can move from individual successful flagship projects to programmatic approaches to then planning infrastructure at scale and reach sustainability. So this is something that we work on in our project and that I would like to explain a bit more in detail on the next slide. What you can see here is a graphic representation of the infrastructure lifecycle that we work with in our project. It shows various stages from the initial political and strategical planning through to project planning, procurement, and finance to the actual implementation, operation, and decommissioning of a specific project. We distinguish in upstream and downstream phases. And as a rule of thumb, we can say that the downstream phases usually begin when it comes to the planning and implementation of one specific project, while the upstream phases are about the political and strategic process of implementing specific infrastructure policies, setting targets for a country or municipality, and developing infrastructure project pipelines. As I just explained on the slide before, to realize positive impacts of infrastructure on sustainability, we need this whole of sustainability approach across infrastructure systems and not only in individual projects, which is what makes these upstream phases so important to target to include sustainability in infrastructure planning. Perfect, thank you. Can you go one further? Yeah. So here, like this shows basically our two lines of work. Our first line of work targets these upstream phases, and while there are many project preparation facilities that can support institutions in the sustainable planning of individual projects, we want to support partners on a higher strategic level in terms of political and institutional change. So this is like the red part that you see. We also work on knowledge management. This is what Elizabeth was referring to earlier, along the entire infrastructure lifecycle, and we try to pool different resources, methods, and tools to make them available to different audiences. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Well, yeah, to recapture this briefly, why is integrating sustainability on an upstream level so important? We say that real progress on the SDGs and the Paris Agreement is only possible if infrastructure systems, their interdependencies and the past dependencies that infrastructure creates are recognized and sustainability is considered in a more strategic and long-term vision. Which gaps does our project try to address? So for one, sustainability on a conceptual level is not always clear. So partners might need support to understand the manifold dimensions and interdependencies between different sustainability dimensions. Infrastructure is also often planned in silos. So to make infrastructure more sustainable, a cross-sectoral approach is necessary, as infrastructures do in general not act independently from one another. The same is actually also true for sustainability issues. So it is not enough to take a siloed approach and, for example, only consider climate effects, but not the social accessibility of an infrastructure project. Therefore, the right framework conditions are necessary, like a clear vision of sustainable infrastructure development set by national government, the incorporation of sustainability principles into procurement policies, or sectoral or national infrastructure policies and plans. And like this, more impact can be generated as the integration of sustainability principles and Paris alignment is ensured in a more systematic way beyond individual infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So yeah, additional to our upstream technical assistance, we work on pooling various knowledge resources within GIZ as well as together with other organizations. And one main aspect, which was mentioned before, is that a variety of organizations have developed tools that can help policymakers, project developers, financiers, and other people working in the field to plan and execute infrastructure strategies and projects more sustainably. And you can see some examples for this on the right of the slide. So in our understanding, tools can be very high-level political principles like the G20 principles for quality infrastructure investment, other multilateral organizations like the OECD and multilateral development banks, but also UNEP, for instance, or UNOP, are developing their own standards and guidelines like the IFC performance standards. More examples of tools are impact assessments or economic valuation tools that then apply more on the project level. Yet there's insufficient application of tools, partly due to lack of information, as well as insufficient knowledge about the benefits and ways of application. And as more and more tools were being developed, GIZ, together with UNEP, saw the need to support people in finding the most relevant tools for their needs. And out of this, the idea for the so-called Sustainable Infrastructure Tool Navigator was born. The Navigator is an online database of more than 100 tools that makes information on these tools easily accessible. And we think that the Navigator is a valuable resource relevant for a multitude of infrastructure practitioners and could be used also as a resource for different IL network hubs. So with that, I actually want to make a bridge to my last slide, and also the value and the opportunity that we see in the idea of the IL network. So in our work, we're already closely cooperating with other partners like UNEP, and the IL network is an opportunity to actually deepen those cooperations and join forces and accelerate the impact of the work that our individual organizations are doing. And in the IL network, we also see an opportunity for infrastructure practitioners to share existing expertise and knowledge amongst different stakeholders and provide a venue for community learning about existing challenges and solutions. Specifically, the work that we do with our partner institutions, be it technical assistance, training, or capacity building, could be complemented through the IL network by providing ongoing support and continuous engagement even after the technical assistance has ended. So especially if the partner institutions are already motivated to join the network during our collaboration, that could add a lot of value to the outcomes of the collaboration. And integrating the Navigator and other knowledge resources that we work with into those different thematic hubs can help the dissemination of good practices, and also offers an opportunity to make our knowledge resources available to a wider audience and incentivizes cross-institutional learning. Therefore, our project stands behind the idea and supports the idea of the IL network, and we're very interested in engaging further in the discussions and participating also in the proliferation of further hubs. And yeah, I'll make a stop here, but I'm of course happy to answer any questions that are coming from the audience. On the next slide. Yeah, just here you can see my contact details in case you would like to get in touch with me. And yeah, that's it from my side, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Mira. Yeah, that was, I think, an excellent illustration of how we envisage that the IL network can both sort of complement the existing work, as well as have access to the expertise and sort of gain from the existing work and other initiatives. That's just one example, but through our networks, we know that we're all doing a lot of similar work, and I think the ideals that the IL network can help complement it and sort of bring a little more cohesion and better coordination amongst us. So thanks very much. I guess quickly, I'll hand it back to Liz, or am I gonna? Okay,
You can do it.
I'll just wrap up before, and then we'll have time for some questions. And yeah, so I mean, as as Liz and Sarah described, we've kind of gone through a year of this pilot phase. We think there's interest and demand out there. We have this idea for some of the initial hubs we'd like to launch. So next steps for us are to continue sort of consulting with our partners and with the community. So this is what we're doing now. But yeah, also we're sort of continually working through our networks to find new partners, launching this upcoming series of hubs, and sort of as those number of hubs start to grow, hopefully start building this administrative support architecture that ultimately could be this the sort of super hub and the global network of support. So yeah, in the context of that effort, we're really looking for new partners, both on the, I guess, more on the expert and the knowledge supply side, but also on the demand side. So different interest from practitioners out there in different communities of practice, and ideally people or organizations who are sort of willing to take on a coordinating role for a particular hub. And then so as part of this, we're also doing some fundraising to help get this all off the ground and really scale it up. One of the nice things about the model is it's really flexible. It can be tailored to meet different demands. With that flexibility comes a certain degree of it's quite cost effective, at least to start something up, to get an initial hub off the ground. It doesn't need to take a huge amount of resources, but also to get that global support architecture in place then does take more resources sort of beyond whatever it takes to run the individual hub. So yeah, we're looking for funding partners as well to help take this forward and really scale it up. I'll stop there, but if I've missed anything.
That was great.
Okay. So yeah, it'd be great to hear if people have feedback or questions, and we'd be happy to discuss. Yes, and could you please, hit the, thanks.
And introduce myself, right? Yes.
Yes, please.
Andrew Kirkwood I'm the head of the Geneva office here for UNOPS. I mean, at any one time, we have over 100 infrastructure projects going on around the world in 70 or 80 countries. And we do have on staff many experts. So I don't want to, it wouldn't be me involved. So I don't want to make any commitments here. But, the model seems quite interesting, that we could potentially offer ourselves to play a role on the expert side, but also potentially on the demand side through either the projects that we're currently running or through the connections that we have in our field offices. I'm not sure if my colleague, the regional infrastructure lead, Stefan, is on the call. I can't see who, he was going to try and join remotely. And if he's on the call, then he could come in and say, either, Andrew, that is a terrible idea, or Andrew, that's a great idea, and he could provide some of the next steps. But yeah, I'm sorry I had to step out for a little bit, so I'm not entirely, I didn't get all of it, but my colleague who is in the same office, Jean-Francois, he was here too. So, I mean, it sounds to me that we could be one of your future partners.
That's great. And I would also say that in our pilot series that we did for a year, we had two inputs from UNEPs. There was, one of the case studies was on an interesting planning project in the Gambia by young woman.
Oh, was it Apoorva? It was colleagues who were working in Copenhagen. Shoot, I can't.
But she was based in
part of
the Gambia.
but...
And then the other was a presentation of one of your tools. I mean, the UNAPS, of course, has developed a whole series of really important tools that should be broadly available, and it shouldn't just be, you know, when a contractor takes them and is able to, would like to be able to create an opportunity to help disseminate them. And UNOPS is, of course, a perfect sort of partner. I would also say a couple other places where I could see a connection is that as we build this up and there is a resource, sort of a library of resources, just even tutorials on, say, how to use a tool or something. So it doesn't have to be in the community of practice. Once you're in, you might be able to then access different resources that we wouldn't develop. We would just either direct people to, say, your site or house, you know. The other thing is that organizations like UNOPS and others that often will come in for a certain time period and then leave. One of the nice things of these communities of practice is to try and, at a very low touch level, continue the interaction for an indefinite time onward, as long as there's interest. And it's really very sort of low effort, but high potential input, particularly after you've put something in place and then a couple of years later to make sure it's still on track and, you know, problem solve as it goes along the way. So we readily would be very excited to work further with UNOPS and, of course, other related agencies. Did you want to add anything to that, Rowan?
No, I think you said said it very well. I mean, I just, yeah, reiterate. I mean, UNOPS is, as you say, I think a sort of natural partner on both the supply and demand side, and already an important partner for us. So I think it would be a good fit. Thanks very much. Anybody else? We have a few questions from online. Anybody else
Well, you take
in the
those
room?
people might
Sounds
have
good.
other.
So looking through, I think I'll probably group them together. So one question is current status of the work. What is the current status of the work? How do we aim to ensure that everyone will be on the same stage of what sustainable infrastructure means? I think that, yeah, that's an important question. A big part of our work, besides just specifically this initiative we're talking about, is really about raising awareness about the issue of sustainable infrastructure, the role of infrastructure in delivering on the SDGs, and really just trying to do some basic education of some of these ideas and concepts about what sustainable infrastructure is. We had the definition there on the I think the first slide of my presentation, but this is something that we're working on continually and really trying to get everyone on the same page in general. But it's also something that can be covered, I think, as part of the training of communities of practice. I mean, depending on the nature of a particular hub, you may have people who have more or less knowledge and expertise on a particular topic, and maybe on the sustainability dimension. So I think a big part of it is sort of addressing that basic question, helping get people on the same page about, you know, what does a sustainable infrastructure project look like, and how do you do it?
Could I add something?
Yeah, please.
Just one other thought. Again, this isn't the ISLE network directly, but there's also been an effort with these broader communities, like for the last couple of years with all these big COPs coming up in climate and biodiversity around protected areas, of raising the profile of infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure in all these spaces, but also having some sort of equivalence as to what they're talking about. So when you talk about sustainable infrastructure in terms of climate, it's not something totally different with biodiversity or labor issues, et cetera, but trying to raise it in a lot of these different international fora. And I know that's a piece of this.
Thanks very much, Liz. So there's a group of similar questions that a few people have asked online. How can we ensure, well, how can member states access such knowledge? How can we ensure that developing countries can access such knowledge. And then getting more specifically, we have somebody joined from the Gambia who's interested in having something like this delivered in the Gambia. So how could could something like this happen in the Gambia? I mean, I guess the short answer is the whole point of this is to be able to respond directly to demand from member states, whether it's sort of at an official request coming through the government or just simply people who are working in member states, especially in developing countries. So it's, I guess, the answer is in principle that the whole point of these hubs is to be able to serve and meet that demand for knowledge and skills and training or whatever it may be. And this is kind of a good segue to the next question, which is, what do you concretely need apart from funding? And I think that's kind of related to these questions of, can you deliver something in this country, or how do people access it? I think we need, number one, the demand for the services. Number two, partners and people who are sort of willing to take on the role of coordinating the meetings and things like this with support from the sort of super hub team. That's the idea. And then some funding also to cover that, but it's really about, I would say, the demand and having the partners to take it on and take things forward. And I think, the idea is, I think that this aligns so well with what a lot of our organizations are already doing and things that we're already trying to deliver. So the idea is not to sort of burden people, but really providing a nice avenue to help deliver what we need to deliver. I don't know, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other piece that needs to happen that you've already said is essentially bringing together the members, the experts out there, the different organizations that have different resources to share, like the UNEP's tool, et cetera, so that we can begin to make those connections when possible. But if anyone out there is interested, contact us directly and we can talk with you about trying to see what we can do to start by setting this up, because this really is a demand-driven network. We're not trying to impose hubs anywhere. We're trying to help where there's a need, create them. So maybe, Sarah, what is our formal email?
It's sustainableinfrastructure@duke.edu, but I think
we can post it in the chat.
Yeah, good idea.
Thanks very much. Any other questions in the room? All right. Oh, yep, Victor.
Thank you, Rowan and colleagues. This is Victor from Zoe. I would like to maybe just make two suggestions. One is that on the one hand, countries take efforts to expand or make better protected areas network, especially these new global biodiversity targets, 2030-50. And they almost compete with infrastructure, who is faster, who covers what. And this is what we observe from our fieldwork activities in Central Asia, because often big infrastructure projects, they go, and then big protected areas expansion plans go, but each side is not aware of each other, who is doing what. And it would be helpful in future project activities to pay attention to that, because all countries are accelerating their biodiversity steps, which is good, but they need to be on the same speed or transparent versus infrastructure. And this is what we have seen, at least in Central Asia, as one of the global regions. And maybe second point on this ancient and new Silkway connecting Europe and Asia. Central Asia is in the middle, and due to current geopolitical shifts, you have not only, let's say, horizontal silkway as it looks on the map, but also longitudinal, vertical. So basically in Central Asia, you have these 2 points interacting, south, north, and east, west. So we would recommend to consider this region as well as part of Southeast Asia efforts. Thanks.
Thanks, Victor. Just to sort of follow up, especially on your first point, Sarah mentioned this Bison project, which is about transportation and biodiversity and trying to mainstream biodiversity into the planning for transportation and implementation operations. But a big part of that is sort of exactly what you say of trying to get a lot of the early planning of where transportation goes to take into considerations a lot of different biodiversity aspects. And we're trying to set up a hub now because in this Bison project, it was really 2 different groups that they brought together, a biodiversity group that were mostly conservation biologists, people who work in the biodiversity sector, along with transportation specialists in government, in the private sector, et cetera. And so getting these folks to talk with each other and potentially form a hub where they continue to interact is one step towards doing that, but just in one sector, transportation.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks for the comments, Victor. I think made me think of a couple of things. One is, I think the examples we've given, well, I guess a couple of them anyway, are sort of about more thematic hubs. One of them is thematic, but also regional, and that's limited in Turkey. I mean, the idea is that you could also have a regional hub. So you could imagine maybe a Central Asia sustainable infrastructure hub or something like that. You know, there's enough flexibility to kind of arrange it, organize a hub around sort of what the demand is. So I think that's, yeah, an interesting idea, and certainly an area that, for the reasons you mentioned, is an important one to engage in. I think it's also, you mentioned the biodiversity aspect, and I think that's another interesting point is, you know, a lot of the sustainable infrastructure discourse is all about climate impacts and low carbon infrastructure. So it's important to, you know, remember these other dimensions of sustainability as well. And nature and biodiversity is another one. And in that sense, the topic of sustainable infrastructure and this kind of initiative sort of sits at the nexus of different kind of global agendas. So the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, but also the new global biodiversity framework, the UNEA Resolutions. So it's really, I think we see it as having a lot of potential for sort of delivering multiple benefits in terms of these different global agendas and their associated targets and things like this. So, yeah, I think if there's any other, yeah, Lisbeth, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Lisbeth Kazier from ISD. Just a short question on it's really interesting to see the different, the next phase and the 4 hubs that you mentioned. And I just wonder, is there any limitation to the type of topics and questions that can be brought to that hub? And if we, or our partner governments, for example, if there are some questions, what's the best way to get in touch with those hubs from the 4 that you mentioned?
Well, so the things like the green-gray hub are already going. So if there's, you know, a case or something else that you'd be interested in sharing, we can make that happen. So just reach out. I think for the other ones, we're still getting them going. So and as we've just been talking about, these are all going to be really demand driven. And so if there's a need for information, then we're happy to connect these hubs with anyone that has information that can be useful. So there's really, as again, we've been saying, one of the benefits is the flexibility. So, we can have a whole session just on a specific tool that might be really useful to a particular community. And then we'd bring in, maybe IISD to present on one of your tools or something like that. So if there's a logical connection, then we can make that happen.
Or to lead a hub, if you like.
And you originally asked, is there any limitations to the topics? And again, there isn't. I want to also just kind of circle back to the Project Echo. The Project Echo has about 500 hubs out there at this point. And before COVID, it didn't have quite 500, a lot, emerged in the last few years, but they had several hundred. And one of the interesting things is it's a global network of healthcare professionals. Each of these hubs that existed had a focus. A lot of them were disease driven. And when COVID came around, they repurposed a lot of these hubs to address COVID because suddenly that's what was there. And it just shows the flexibility of this model, that it's not, just because they were maybe focused on hepatitis B, suddenly you have a structure in place that links doctors to major health centers, et cetera. And they said, hey, do you need any help? Do you want to help now? Bring together folks who are interested in setting up vaccination centers or whatever. And so a lot of it is just creating this global interconnected network.
Great, thanks. So I think I'm not seeing any more hands and nothing else online. So yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today, and thanks to those people who joined online. Thanks again to the Gen colleagues for helping organize everything. As we've said, this is an ongoing thing, so we're really hopefully looking forward to talking to some of you and looking at ways that we might be able to collaborate and support each other going forward. So
Do you want to just point out that we redid that in case somebody didn't notice the sustainability?
okay, just an FYI, the email that was provided for the contact has been updated in the chat. So if you got it wrong the first time, so if you noted it once, please check again and get the correct email. But with that, please join us. We really hope to hear from many people, and thanks for coming, and I will close the event now.
So when we checked, Stefan was not online. That's why we didn't give him the floor.